Hello, everyone. I wanted to spend a few minutes with you just talking about test taking tips. I think that if you watch nothing else, watch this video at least, because I'm going to give you some tips on how to eliminate answers and how to choose the best answer on the OGTs. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And just jump right away into my PowerPoint side. As you're going through this, I want you to take some notes for you to look at right before you go into testing, just to refresh your memory of exactly what you're going to want to keep in mind while you're taking the test. So what do we know about the OGTs? Before we even get started on that, I just want to let you know that when you go in to take the test, of course, you're going to be nervous. Everybody's nervous when they take a test. It's perfectly normal, and you can actually use that to your benefit. Being nervous does help you focus a little bit better. Typically, like when I go in to take a test, I'm really nervous for the first few minutes. And then as I start to get into the test, that nervousness fades away. So what I would recommend doing is going in, expect to be nervous. And then once that nervousness has faded away, maybe go back and recheck your answers. I guarantee they're probably going to be your best choices anyway, because you're a lot more focused than you think you are when you're nervous. But go back and check them anyway. But expect to be nervous. Okay, so what do we know about the OGTs? They're somewhat predictable. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they kind of ask the same questions. They're called anchor questions. And the way that they try to trick you is also predictable, which is why this video is so important. Also, study your charts. If you ever have done tutoring with me, I always tell you this, like before you look at the answers, look at your charts, know exactly what the chart is telling you, look for similarities, look for broad similarities and broad differences, and then summarize in your head exactly what that chart's trying to tell you. And I will give you an example of what I mean by that. But that's going to really help you a lot, because if you don't look at the chart and you look at the answers are going to try to trip you up. So it's important to do that. Pay attention to the keywords in your question. If you're trying to eliminate answers, go back and look at your keywords. Sometimes your answer is embedded in the question, and I'll go over an example of that too. Also, look for opposites in your answers. Usually if they have one answer, usually they have two answers that are saying the exact opposite thing of each other. One of them's right and one of them's exactly wrong. Eliminate the obvious. What I mean by that is they always have a garbage answer that makes zero sense. Get rid of that one right away and just eliminate those as you go along. Also, use your scratch paper. You should be given 2 sheets of scratch paper. Use that to brainstorm ideas, to re-summarize questions in your head. And of course, if you're doing a math OGT, that's especially important to use your scratch paper. More tips. Answer the easy questions first. This is a digital test, so that tip is not super relevant, but for sure, if you're going through the test and there's one that's really, really hard, come back to it and do the easy ones first. But at the same time, and this is tip number 5, never skip a question. Like, make sure at the end of the test you've answered every question. You have 100% probability of failing the question if you don't at least attempt it, right? So if you guess it, you have like what, a 1 in 5 chance of getting it if you have no idea what you're doing. So answer every question. Also, a really good practice to keep in mind is to answer the question in your mind before looking at the answers. The answers are going to try to trick you. That's what they try to do. So if you have a good idea what the answer is in your mind before you look at the answers, your probability of getting that right exponentially heightens. So do that. Read every option, because even if you have answered it in your head, there might even be a better answer in the question, in the answers. So make sure you read every one and then eliminate answers you know are total garbage. So know your anchor questions. If you walk into the OGTs knowing what those anchor questions are, you're 2 steps ahead of the game. Anchor questions are the same kinds of questions they ask on every test. When I do tutoring, I always let you know what those anchor questions are. I've also done a lot of other videos that include material that are always in those anchor questions. So if you walk in the test and you have that basic fundamental knowledge, you're 2 steps ahead. They're always going to be outlying questions in the OGTs. They just want to know how much more do you know. But that on those questions, you can use your elimination and some of the tips I'm giving you now. But really get familiar with those anchor questions. I still have a lot of work to do with the YouTube videos to get those anchor questions out to you, but at least get what's there, and I'll continue creating as I go along. So like I've said before, study those charts first. Here's a great example, right? This is a really easy chart because I don't want this video to be too long, so I just chose something easy. But let's read the question here. The graph below shows the relationship between maternal age and the incidence of children born with Down syndrome, a condition that results in an individual having an extra chromosome 21. Now, let's look at this chart, okay? And you always want to study all parts of a chart. It'll really help you, I promise. So you have individuals per 100 births. And up here, your title is Incidence of Down syndrome. So we have individuals per 1,000 births and your maternal age. So if you look at this chart, you can see that at 19, the incidence of Down syndrome is very low. It stays low at 24. It goes up a little bit at 29, a little bit more at 34, and then exponentially raises after 34, after age 39. Look at how different your odds change of having a Down syndrome child. So let's look at the answers. A, there is no risk of Down syndrome children and born to mothers under the age of 34. We know that's incorrect, right? Because there is some risk. The risk of Down syndrome increases dramatically in children born to mothers after age 34. That looks like it's pretty true. The risk of Down syndrome doubles in children born to mothers for each year over the 34. There's no evidence for that. There is no correlation between the number of Down syndrome births and age. Absolutely not true, right? So let's get rid of our garbage answer. D, and A, that's also garbage because we obviously have some incidences of Down syndrome. It's not high, but it's there. So if we were to whittle our answers down to B and C, I can tell you right away that B is the correct answer. It just increases dramatically. It doesn't seem to double. It just increases dramatically. So the answer is B. So if you've looked at this chart first and you understand it, finding the answer is going to be pretty easy. Now we're going to do this question here. This is not the greatest question in the world, but this is a question where if you pay attention to the key words in the question, finding the answer is going to be a lot easier. So keywords can help you figure out the answers. Read each question twice to make sure you understand exactly what the question is asking. This is something I do as a test taker. I tested for years and years, right? If you always read the question twice, because sometimes you don't really know what the question's asking. It's vital that you do that, especially if it's a super wordy question. But let's try this. Rising ocean temperatures can cause corals to expel the symbiotic algae on which they depend for survival. Which human influence could be responsible for an increase in this phenomenon? So first of all, expelling the symbiotic algae means that corals, symbiotic means that they use that to survive, right? The algae uses the corals to survive and the corals use the algae. That's what symbiotic means. If the corals are expelling that, that means that they're putting their lives in danger, and also the algae aren't able to survive without the corals. This is a really bad thing, right? So we have some answers here. So let's go through and read the answers, right? So you have shoreline erosion, burning fossil fuels, solar power generation, or introduction of non-native species. So you're looking at this, you're like, I have no idea what the answer is, right? But go back, let's look at our keywords here. That should give you some indication to help you eliminate some of the answers. So we're looking at rising ocean temperatures. So what's going to make the ocean temperature rise? That's what's causing this thing to happen, right? And a human influence, right? So those are your two keywords. You want to pay attention to that because you can take A right out of question, right? Oh, eliminate that right away, right? Because that's not causing ocean temperatures to rise, and that's not human influence either. And you know this in your head, right? I have a lot of students choose A, but in your head, you know that that's the wrong answer because shoreline erosion has nothing to do with ocean temperatures or human influence. Burning fossil fuels, probably the right answer. Solar power generation, yes, humans do solar power generations, but do we do that over the ocean? Is that causing our ocean temperatures to rise? No. We use solar power generation for our homes, right? Introduction of non-native species. Now, again, this is a human influence. We do put things into our lakes and oceans that are non-natives, and it can destroy the ecology. But that does not make the ocean temperatures rise, right? So this is actually the burning of fossil fuels. Now, anytime you see an answer that has the burning of fossil fuels, that's probably going to be the answer anyway, just because the OGTs will ask you fossil fuel questions. It has to do with climate change, which is rising ocean temperatures, right? So burning fossil fuels wreaks a lot of damage on our planet. So 9 times out of 10, if the answer is burning fossil fuels, that's the answer. But that's your way to eliminate, is you pay attention to these keywords. It'll help you eliminate a lot of answers. Eliminating your garbage answers, okay? And also the opposites. One is right and one is exactly wrong. And look for clues in your question, right? So here's an example. An astronomer investigating a star determines that the light waves she observes are longer than those expected to be emitted by the star. What can be concluded about the motion of the star relative to Earth's position? The star is moving closer to the Earth. The star is moving away from the Earth. The star is accelerating faster than the Earth, or the star is accelerating at the same speed as Earth. Well, you can tell what the garbage answer is here, because if you're looking at something whose light waves are longer, it's not going to be the same speed no matter what, right? Because it's longer. If it were the same, it would be the same, right? I mean, that's in theory could be true if you're trying to eliminate answers. So you're going to throw out D, right? Now let's look at A, B, and C. The star is moving closer to the Earth. The star is moving away from the Earth. Those are opposite answers, right? So what I'm trying to tell you to do is this is a really this is a normal trick that the OGT uses, right? You have the right answer and you have the opposite of the right answer. The star is accelerating faster than the Earth. You can eliminate that one, and because we have opposites here. So the star is moving closer to the Earth. The star is moving away from the Earth. If you've ever done tutoring with me, and once I make the astronomy video, you'll know that if there are longer wavelengths, that means that the star is moving away from the Earth. Now, if you didn't know anything about that, about wavelengths or anything like that, and you whittled it down to A or B, at least you have a 50-50 chance of getting that right, right? So always look for those opposite answers when you have no idea what the answer is. Look for the opposites. It's going to be one of those two. I guarantee it. I give you my word on that. That is a trick that the OGTs use quite a bit. And one more thing, you have to answer short answers on the OGTs. They usually have 2 of these per test. So when you go into these, you have to expect your brain to freeze for a moment, right? I see this a lot with students. You get to the short answers and suddenly your brain is like, I don't know what to do, because you've been answering these multiple choice questions. And so when you hit these short answer questions, it forces your brain to just stop, because you have to think about this all on your own by yourself with no help, right? So what does that mean? I'm going to pull up an example. I don't think I have one on here. I don't. Let's pull up a short answer question, and I'll show you exactly what that means. If you go to the OGT website, go to study materials, go to OGT practice test. This is, you guys also need to know this, so that's why I'm doing this. We'll go to the science here, start test. I think the short answer question is right here. So what do I mean by rewrite your answer? So state two factors and explain how each influences the weather in Ohio. Literally, to rewrite the question is to literally just steal the words right from the question, right? But I'm going to say one factor that influences the weather in Ohio is, I'm going to say are actually mountains. Okay. Mountain ranges capture moisture. We're going to say not capture, we're going to say trap moisture from the air that cools the atmosphere. Another factor that influences the weather in Ohio. Sorry, you guys have to watch me type badly. The weather in Ohio are large bodies of water. Large bodies of water put moisture into the air and cool the temperatures. This is why deserts are so much, why the temperatures are so extremely warm or extremely cold, because you don't have bodies of water or mountain ranges to regulate that air control. So I want to show you what I did there. I restated the question, not once, but twice, because I was doing two influences, right? So I made a statement and then I made a supporting statement. So another thing to keep in mind when you do these short answers is look at the number of points on the question. The number of points are going to give you an idea of how many sentences you need to write. Just because usually if it's 4 points, it's going to be a 2-part answer. And don't miss that. And also expect your brain to freeze up a little bit on these. You're forcing your brain to reroute. You have to think about these. Sometimes it's really hard. When I first started doing these, the same thing happened to me. But then I took out that scratch paper and you brainstorm ideas. You brainstorm everything you can think of. And honestly, what you write down here is not as important as how well you can support it, right? So I get a lot of different answers for this question. And as long as you can support the answers and it's well written, you're going to get at least some points for it. So just take your time on these and use those tricks. It'll help you a ton. Also typing out, this is technically your thesis statement. And you can't mess that up as long as you're stealing the words from the question, okay? So those are just some tips for you on those short answer questions. You do have to answer those in order to pass the OGT, so don't forget that. So in review, take your time. You have 2.5 hours per test. Don't rush through it. This is an important test. So just take your time. There's no reason to rush, right? You're there at the testing center. You drove there. So use all of that time. Make sure you double check your answers. Answer the question in your head first. That's actually really important because you're less likely to be tricked if you have some idea of what the answer is, right? Use the tips I showed you to eliminate wrong answers. Select the best answer. Read every answer prior to choosing the final answer, and answer the questions you know first. Like I said, it's a digital test, so you're going to be shown one question at a time. But if you need to go back to questions, definitely do that. 2.5 hours is a long time. The students that do the best on these tests usually take more time. If you're doing it too fast, probably not a good indication that that's probably a good indication that you're rushing through it too much, okay? And then make an educated guess. So think through them, look for your keywords, and just take a moment. A lot of the questions on the OGT, especially the science in particular, and a lot of times when I talk about this, I'm referring to science. That tends to be one of the hardest tests. A lot of times you'll read the questions too fast, you'll answer too quickly, and just slow down. And then what I was going to say is a lot of times with the science test, you have to think one step past what they're asking you, right? So stop for a moment and really think about it. And there's on the first form of the OGTs, there's a question about a food chain. You have to think about it like this. If the food source, if if a predator runs out for one food source, what other animal is getting that extra food source? That's what I mean by thinking one step ahead. Okay. So you have to learn how to do that. Do the practice questions on the practice test. And I'm not going to waste any more of your time. That's all I've got. If you have any other questions or you want to do a tutoring session with me, schedule that right away. And good luck.